Okay, thanks for coming. Tonight we're talking about songwriting and production and just the loose concepts of arrangement. Um, I do this with all my students, well, the ones who want to talk about songwriting. Uh, so everyone who goes through the process ultimately loves it. All of them, they've always loved it. Initially, it's a kind of a slow start, and you're just gonna have some blind faith that I have a direction here, and we're gonna kind of start with just the basics, uh, and it's a really fun, cool, unique process that um, helps you kind of learn how to listen to music, in my opinion, and dissect it differently than you probably do otherwise. Um, so I got like this little blurb here. Um, Songwriting is subjective. That's the first thing worth mentioning. So if you want to listen to all the stuff that I have in here, you're welcome to. If you just want to throw it out when you leave, you're welcome to, because there's no right or wrong answer to how to write a song. Uh, Call Me Maybe is a good example of that. And here it said like the amount of fans that Nickelback and or Justin Bieber have amassed thus far is a pretty good indication that uh, songwriting is definitely a very, very subjective art. But because of that, I don't think that you can learn how to, or I don't think let me phrase that. I don't think I can teach anyone how to write a song because it's, like I said, it's completely subjective. So what I started doing years ago, and this was for me, like I'd write songs, and usually while writing them, you love them, and you give it a month, and you listen back, and you're like, this is not a good song. This is actually really awful. Um, and I was trying to figure out what the difference was between the songs that I wrote and the artists that may have inspired them. So what I started doing is like really going through and dissecting all of uh, all of the music that I really liked. And by dissecting, I wrote down everything except transcribing the music itself in a notebook. And I did that for all of my favorite records. And slowly but surely, I started filling up all these notebooks with how with the overall concepts of the songs that inspire me to write and or play music. Um, and it ended up being a really cool process, and it completely changed how I listen to music. Uh, so um, all we're going to do tonight is kind of establish the ground rules in terms of how I would do that. Um, so keep in mind that I know that I can't teach you how to write a song, but I can teach you how to critically listen to the songs that you guys like, uh, and that is it's quite the feat. And if you complete this process, I feel like you'll be a better musician, and you'll listen to music differently than you might have otherwise. It's pretty cool. So first things first. When I listen to a song, I usually break it down into three concepts or three parts. The progression. So a progression is usually just a couple of chords. Some songs can get away with having one chord for the entirety of a part, but it's usually two, 2, 3, 11 chords before the part recycles. Um, then there's usually some form of a melody over the top of it. Traditionally it's easy to say vocals, but if you're playing in an instrumental band, it could be guitars or synthesizers or whatever. Some form of a melody that kind of sits over a chord progression. If you put a few of those chord progressions together, or a few of those melodies, now you have to determine what order they go in, and that creates a structure. Uh, so those are the three basic, core parts to a song that allow you, or that kind of encompass all genres of music. You will essentially have some form of a progression, some form of a melody over the progression, and then all of those things put together create some order of all the parts. So that's your structure. Uh, so um, in terms of creative listening, I brought music to listen to. Uh, and all of this stuff that we'll kind of use tonight, I have no feelings about it either way in terms of whether I don't really recreationally listen to any of this. But they're good examples, which is why we're using them. So Bob Dylan, "Knocking on Heaven's Door," pretty easy classic tune that most people know. What's cool about this song is it's the same chord progression, the entire song, front to back. You know, classic song. He sold, thousands, if not a million copies of this tune, and then it's been remade by Guns N' Roses and a bunch of other bands. So it's basically G, D, A minor 7, the entire song. But they change the melodies that sit over the top of it, and now you have a complete tune that doesn't necessarily feel overly repetitive because each part is establishing a new concept. So that is not Bob Dylan. That's Shiner. I recommend listening to that too. Is this going to be a jerk? The internet has gone out and won't let me access my iTunes, which is good and convenient and perfect timing. Let me see if this works here. Hold on here. I could have sworn that I added the file today. Hold on here. I'm not giving up. Essential Bob Dylan. Cross your fingers. It's thinking. Huh. It is not letting me on the internet, and it didn't download the file correctly. I can't believe that. What are the odds? Oh well, we'll survive without it, I think. It's like I said, it's the same thing the whole time. Let me see if I have it on my phone or can access it. Yeah, maybe not. So basically, it's just guitar on the intro with some, essentially some backup singers that create the impression of what you would call an intro. There's no real lyrics or anything like that. It's just this general, this general melody that kind of lives over the top of it. Let's see if this works. So we ran into a problem when we tried to upload this to YouTube. Apparently, Bob Dylan is very stringent on what material he allows on the internet. So let me explain to you what we tried to do. In the song "Knockin' on Heaven's Door," it's 3 chords, G, D, A minor 7, for the entire length of the song. But there are 3 primary melodies, some oohs on the intro, his lyrics of the verse, and then the knock, knock, knockin' on heaven's door that defines the chorus. So even though the chords are the same the entire time, those 3 melodies help differentiate each part, thusly creating a structure of intro, verse, chorus, intro, verse, chorus, and then they bring the oohs back for the outro. If you look on the internet, I'm sure you could find the song and listen to even just a cover of it and understand the concept here, that the melodies over a static progression could help define the overall structure of the song. Sorry about that. It's a great example of how some people can do a lot with a little. There we go. I can't believe the phone came in. It worked there. That was convenient. So basically all I'm getting at here is that is, to me, the simplest way to display the concept of progression, melody, and structure. It's one progression for throughout the whole song. Essentially three different melodies: the intro, oohs, the lyrics on the verse, and the chorus hook. And now we have 3 parts: an intro, a verse, and a chorus. And they basically just repeat that for the rest of the song. So those are the 3 parts to kind of latch onto. Can't stress that enough. So we're not gonna go deep into this. Does anyone here know music theory? I know you know some. Okay, so real basic music theory, and not that you have to know this to write a song, but this is going to drive home a concept, hopefully. What is this on my computer? There we go. So this here is a guitar. How do I? Okay, so we know that there's essentially 12 notes in the music that we play, 0 to 12 on a guitar. Those are all the possible scales that we could have. 12 scales in the music that we listen to. Other cultures can kind of get away with some other cool stuff, but we stick with our 12 notes. A major scale is 7 of those 12 notes, and it has to follow a very specific pattern. That's not important right now. It would be cool if you guys knew music theory. You could go in depth with these concepts, but for now it's not important. All you really have to know is that every major scale has 7 notes. Each note is assigned a tonality. So we're going to stick with the key of C because C has no sharps and flats. It's just going to be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and just kind of repeats. So the 7 notes in musical alphabetical order: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So something worth noting. We'll do it like this. Every note of a scale has a tone, major or minor, and it is always in the same order. So because of that, all 12 of your major scales, well, the formula is always going to be the same. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Doesn't matter what key you're in. Doesn't matter, what scale you're in. So that means every scale has the same 7 chords, essentially. They're just, you change the tonality, or you change the key. So in the key of C, it's all natural letters: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. In the key of G, there's 1 sharp, so it'd be G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. I'll try not to go too deep because I know it gets ugly quick. So, but the real basic idea is that each scale degree of a chord is either major, minor, or diminished. So in the key of C, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, should have brought a cutaway guitar, B diminished, C major. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Again, not super important to know that yet. And it's not anything that, I would force you to know to write a song. But here's the basic idea. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, that's the C major scale. And the formula is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you're playing the key of G, the formula is still the same, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, because it's still 7 notes. And those 7 notes are still major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. So if you look on your sheet, it's in Roman numerals, and that's usually normal basic music theory stuff. And you can see that it's either capital or lowercase in terms of what the scale notes are. Hey Dane, would you grab 3 more sheets? Thanks, dude.
Make it 5.
Make it 5, apparently.
Make it 5.
So, basically, the overall concept I want you to get out of all of this is that it doesn't matter which of the 12 keys you're playing in. Scales can be broken down to one uniform concept of 7 notes in a row that are major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished every time. And it's always notated on here where it says 7 notes per scale with capital letters for your major notes and lowercase for minor notes. Okay, that's the most boring concept here. So I just wanted you to know that every chord in a key is assigned a number. And that number is important because that number is how we differentiate chord progressions. So if you've ever played blues, or I'm sure most of you have seen Back to the Future, and if not, that will be the next meeting. We'll just watch Back to the Future. So Michael J. Fox is on stage, and he's trying to communicate to these musicians in the 50s, and he's also in the 50s, though. And I'm not going to ruin the plot here, so don't worry if you haven't seen it. But he's saying, okay, we're just going to play a standard blues progression in the key of A, watch me for the changes. That blues progression, every blues progression is 1, 4, 5. That's just the standard blues progression. So if you're in the key of A, that means A is your 1 chord, A, B, C. D is your 4 chord, E is your 5 chord. There you go. Now everyone knows the chord progression, 1, 4, 5. If he said it's in the key of G, it would be G, C, and D. The numbers are always the same distance apart. So it's always the same chord progression, but you can change the key. And this is the concept that people don't get. A lot of young musicians tend to write the same song over and over again. They write the same chord progression without realizing it, because they might, they'll play, oh, check out this riff, 1, 3, 5, and then the band writes the song, and you come back the next week, oh, check out this riff, 6, 8, 10. It's like, that's the same chord progression. The progression itself has not changed. You've changed the key, but the chord progression is still the same. So it cracks me up, because a band might play here, and I'll hear someone say, they were cool, but all their songs sounded the same. That's the subconscious response when a band uses the same chord progression the whole time and may not realize it. And it's true. It shocks me how many bands do this, especially metal bands. I hate to say it, guys. When you drop D or drop C, and then open 8, open 8, open 1, like they're predictable chord progressions, and like, oh, you know what? We did open 8 a lot in drop C, so let's go to drop B. Open 8, open 8. It's still the same song. It's still the same chord progression, and that's the hardest thing for bands to break out of. And when I'm recreationally listening listening to music, I'm looking for people who have a cool grasp of how music works, and they write songs with cool chord progressions instead of maybe playing the same, like the half of the record is the same song. Obviously it's different. All the songs might end up being different, but they're still built around the same music theory concept that 1, 3, 5 and 6, 8, 10 are it's the same progression. You've changed the key, but the progression itself hasn't changed. So jazz is 2, 5, 1, blues is 1, 4, 5, and what I consider to be the modern rock chord progression is some form of the 4, 5, 6. A lot of times it's 4, 6. It's just back and forth, 4, 6. Sometimes it'll be 4, 5, 6. Sometimes, but not always, they will include the 1. But like if you're in standard tuning, that's 4, 6. If I add the 5 in there, it's the go-to chord progression for most young musicians, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I always, I tell my students or bands that I'm recording or producing or whatever, I'll tell them, you get 1, use it, because it's a good progression. There's nothing wrong with it. The primary issue that I have is that it's overused, because people don't realize that they're overusing it. They don't realize that because you change tunings or anything like that, that you're still writing the same riff. You've just changed keys, or you've just moved it in some regard. So it's very important to understand that chord progression. So on this, let's see here. Yeah, on this next page, what is this? Xfinity Wi-Fi. I'm gonna put on a song here. Once upon a time, many years ago, man, over 10 years ago, I had a bunch of young students. They were they weren't even old enough to drive. I had to drive them to the studio. They were a band called Bleeding Martyr, and we recorded, for a bunch of 13 or 14-year-old kids, made a pretty good record for 10 years ago. Didn't have the technology that you have now. There was no GarageBand for these kids to demo their songs. So here's a tune. Okay, so that was B down to G. Now it's the 4/6 chord progression, right? No big deal. Everyone gets one. And I mean, obviously the riffs are more elaborate than what I'm playing, but I'm just breaking it down to the simple power chord because you can. Okay, so that was A down to F. Same chord progression. Two whole steps apart. So they released an entire record that was basically this chord progression. Sorry. And that's, that was the thing in 2002, 2003. So, I cut some slack for a bunch of 13-year-old kids who are writing a record. But if you listen to the other popular bands that were doing that at the same time, let's see here. So it's just thrice artist manual. Same thing, same chord progression. This entire record is the same deal. I think there are 12 songs on this record, and 11 of them are the 4/5/6 progression. You can doctor it up with chugs and pinch harmonics and all the other stuff. It's still the same chord progression. Another classic. They had I think three or four singles off of this record, which is awesome to me because they were the same song. Realistically, same chord progression. Obviously, lyrical content and all that stuff is different. But if you break it down into the simple pop structure and chord progression, it's still 4/5/6 the entire record. In my opinion, it doesn't make it a bad record, but it does make it kind of monotonous. You kind of go through the whole thing. It's like, wow, every song is drop C, open 8, or some variation of it. What's the other one? I don't even know. There it is. Open 10, open 10, 8. So like that's pretty much standard par for the course, and I feel like the good majority of like heavy emo, screamo, hardcore bands, that's kind of the go-to chord progression these days, which is unfortunate. But that's the nature of the game. When you have a cool popular sound, that tends to be the thing that everyone goes for. So we'll keep cruising along here. So those we've talked about chord progressions, structure. There is something that I consider to be like the classic pop structure, and this is usually what most people, when they're writing songs, this is where it starts. So intro, start a song, goes into the verse. You have a chorus, a verse, a chorus, a bridge, which is usually the one new part, chorus, and then the end, whether in that end could be an outro or maybe it just ends at the chorus. There's a couple throwaway parts that might be added, a pre-chorus or a post-chorus, something that goes in between the verse and the chorus to kind of change the dynamics, so that way everything doesn't get smushed up against each other. For those of you who were there, maybe last meeting or maybe 2 meetings ago, I introduced the concept of the riff sandwich, and this is something that I believe in, and this is, if you were to write a song, I feel like songs and sandwiches kind of go together. And basically, if you brought me a sandwich with white bread and a slice of bologna and a piece of American cheese, by definition, it is a sandwich, but it will also suck because it's white bread, bologna, and a piece of American cheese. If you improve each part, and I'm trying to remember what I said last time. I don't even know. Pretzel bun, roast beef, and aged cheddar. Now the 3 parts of that sandwich are drastically improved. But even then, it's only going to be so-so. It's all the little things that you cannot make a sandwich out of that make a sandwich better. So honey mustard and maybe a slice of tomato, maybe a slice of onion, something like that. Like if you just brought me a plate of like a piece of tomato and a thing of honey mustard and a piece of onion, I would be very disappointed because you obviously can't do anything with that. But those little pieces make the sandwich better, and I feel like pre-chorus, post-chorus, things like that. That is your honey mustard or your onion or whatever, however you wanna slice it. Onion joke. But even then, it all goes hand in hand. So pre-chorus or post-chorus, it's probably not a part that's strong enough to sit on its own in another song, but you can use it to have the dynamic change to go from your verse to your chorus or whatever, what have you. So a couple concepts that are worth referencing. When you listen to pop music, and I always start at pop music because even though I don't listen to it, I don't particularly enjoy most pop music that I hear. It's the easiest to break down. Break down. It's the easiest to dissect because it's music that has been simplified to such a massive degree, so that way the widest audience will appreciate it. So there are a few things worth referencing that if you start with pop music, you can work your way through to start adding parts, and suddenly it's kind of progressive. You change the nature of those parts, and maybe it's metal or maybe it's jazz. It's not a far stretch to kind of go from pop music to that place. But for now, we're gonna come at it from a pop point of view, and we're gonna look at how it can apply universally to all genres. So something that most popular music, whether it's Foo Fighters or Taylor Swift, something that they all kind of use is whatever the last chorus is, that one's turned up to 11, trying to make sure that they're selling that hook to you. This is the last chance they have to get that song stuck in your head, so they're gonna throw that hook at you with everything they've got. So usually the last chorus is going to be a little more elaborate than the previous choruses, and there's going to be any number of ways that they're going to do it. They're going to add parts, they're going to change instrumentation. There could be any number of things. I even wrote it on here. The structure itself transcends genres. Bands that I've kind of taken apart using this methodology. Taylor Swift, she uses this pop structure, which I'm sure is like totally shocking to you guys. Terror, hardcore band, do the same. Fall Out Boy, Death Cab for Cutie. I mean, this is a widely used structure. This is, like I said, the most commonly used structure when starting a song. And then you can start to add and adjust and change things as time goes by, and that's when it gets into progressive music and progressive songs. Smart songs versus what I consider to be local songs. And I'm not saying that any of you are guilty of it, but if you're at the Oasis a few times a month and you watch 4 or 5 bands play, you start to see that a lot of young bands or local bands fall for the same traps. And this is kind of referencing back what I was saying earlier. I wanted to figure out for me what my songs or how my songs were different than the bands that I was inspired by. So I started writing everything down in notebooks. And what I mean by everything is I would put on a song and I would hit pause every 10 seconds and write down what I heard. 10 seconds, write down what I heard, just all the way through the record. And then I would have a manual, essentially, of what I considered to be good music. And so if I was ever working on a tune, eventually it got to the point where I could kind of just recall it because I'd done it enough times. But early on, there'd be times where I'd be working on a song and be like, this needs something here. It needs some honey mustard to get from this part to this part. So I'd hop in the manual and be like, oh man, Shiner totally did this cool little, change in term. They maybe changed from 5/4 to 6/4, and that totally bridged the gap between those two parts. So what you're doing is essentially making yourself a manual of cool song ideas. So, in terms of local songs versus smart pop songs, they usually bring in the producers, the big hired guns to take a band's songs and trim them down in terms of getting rid of all the extra stuff that maybe isn't needed and then making them smart. And what I mean by making them smart is the concept of recycling. And this is the big one that most local bands don't pick up on, sadly. And like I said, I'm not saying that you guys are guilty, but just in general. It's the idea of never being repetitive. And that doesn't mean you have to be progressive and change your parts, So your whiteboard at your dry erase board at practice has 400 parts on it, but you can repackage and rebrand the same riff or the same melody or this in general the same part, so that way it doesn't sound like the same part. And that's what most bands are doing that in my opinion are writing, like I said, smarter music, because when you listen to it, it feels fresh the whole time. It doesn't feel like, oh, verse 1 and verse 2 are the same. That's boring. Usually those songs don't have lasting power at all. You listen to them once and you get it, and you're like, okay, good. Now I don't have to hear that song again. So there's a bunch of different ways that this can be done, and this is in my opinion when you start going through and you go through the process of writing out what all of your favorite songs are, you have a new perspective on what bands are doing. So an example of recycling a part, maybe the first part of the verse, or like verse 1 is all strummed, verse 2 is all palm muted, right? It's the same part, but you've textured it differently, so it doesn't come across like it's the identical dynamic as the first verse. It's simple, but it makes all the difference. And this is just a good example of a very basic concept. Or maybe early in the song you have a melody that's on vocals, and then later in the song that melody's on guitars, stuff like that. In my opinion, I put on here, the rules have changed in terms of writing creative songs. AC/DC couldn't put out a record today as a new band and find the success that they had. The rules that we're kind of playing by now have been watered down and recycled since the 60s when saleable pop music really took off. You can take influence from like the classic rock bands and stuff like that, but be aware that they were able to get away with it at a different era than the music that we're writing today. We're gonna do 2 Fall Out Boy songs. Okay, I don't particularly get into Fall Out Boy. I know a couple of you guys do, or at least did. I don't recreationally listen to it. They're not for me. They never were. Just not for me. But I do think that it's smart. I think that the songs are well written and they're successful for a reason. So just because I don't like it doesn't mean that I can't find value in it. And I think it's really well produced, which that holds a lot of value to me. I don't have to like the music, but I mean, even today, and it took me such a long time to get over this, because early on, I'd be like, oh, pop music is awful, I hate it. If it's on the radio, it's terrible. Realistically, a lot of the music is terrible, like almost all of it. But previously, I didn't even give it a fair chance. So now when I hear a Taylor Swift song, I don't like it at all, but I can listen to it from the songwriter or the producer standpoint and be like, oh, that was a really cool idea. That was a really smart way that they layered in a new texture to make this different, or things like that. You almost throw out what the content of the song is, and you just listen to the concepts of it. It changed how I appreciate music. And like I said, like someone's going to play a Katy Perry song, I am not listening to the Katy Perry song, but I'm listening to, you know, the creative, you know, chord progression that they might be doing, or the overall production. How are they differentiating the parts? What are they doing to make this song play by the new production and arrangement standards that have been kind of, like I said, that everyone, the rules that people are playing by now. So Fall Out Boy, I don't, like I said, I don't like them. You know, I don't rephrase that. I'm sure as people they're fine, but the music that they write, not for me. So, okay, why is this Xfinity thing popping up? Here at the Oasis, we have had really bad luck with all things Wi-Fi related for the last 6 weeks or so. And the one time that I trying to do things without the internet keeps popping up. Okay. So we're first song we're gonna do here, and again, I know I don't want to judge you guys, but by the looks of it, most of you look pretty metal, at least more metal than me. So, Blind Faith. Trust me, this stuff is cool, and I know it's Fall Out Boy and not metal, but there's a process here, and it does work. I promise. So we're gonna start off with Sugar, We're Going Down. Okay, first thing I hear, to me, obviously it's a drum beat, and it's establishing what I'm going to call intro A. But more than anything, that to me is kind of a drum hook. Like, that's a drum beat I could try to sing to someone, and I immediately know what this song is the second I hear that drum beat. That's hard to do on drums. You know, it's not like a guitar riff or something like that, or a vocal melody. On drums, it's tough because it's not even a real instrument, right? So it makes it especially important that they got that right. So right off the bat, we're going from what I'm going to call a drum hook, because I think it's that good, and we have a transition. Mutes. That is the honey mustard that's gluing that drum beat to that chord progression. Okay, so now we've established a chord progression. We have a drum hook, we have muted transition, I think that's what I called it. We have a full band chord progression, so obviously two guitars and a bass now. And then they introduce that muted chord progression again. I don't feel like that's repetitive yet, because that mute is just just 4 mutes. It's really quick, but it's familiar, which is pleasant. Now we have a new part. New part is a guitar melody. Cool. You know, it's what they've done is, whether or not the average listener is aware of it, in my opinion, what they've done is they've somehow managed to take that chord progression that's really just 4 chords. It's really 3 chords. I think it's like open 5, 9, 5, just 3 chords, but obviously they've turned it into a 4-part chord progression. They've introduced a new melody over the top of it, so now it feels different. It's, whether or not you think of it that way, it's your ear is now drawn to the melody. So they've given us this part that's essentially the same thing the whole time, but each time they're introducing a new element. Drums, muted transition, chord progression, muted transition, guitar melody. And now we have a dynamic drop where everything is just kind of coming down. See, you know the song. You look metal, but you know the song. That dynamic drop is allowing the band to change the mood, which it's an effective dynamic change. So what instruments did you guys hear on that verse? What's going on? Anybody? I heard the song, right? Did you guys hear the song too? Let me back this up here. Bass, drums, and vocals. What I find particularly impressive about Fall Out Boy is that the singer, he's a good singer, especially in pop punk. He has the physical ability to sing and project his vocals without usually sounding like too whiny, which is kind of like a trait of pop punk. But what I find impressive is that I can't understand a word that dude says ever, and they were one of the biggest bands in the world. I don't know how a band can be so big when it sounds like a dude singing with a mouthful of grapes, and it's just really impressive to me. So we have bass, drums, and vocals, and we have a dynamic here, and I try to reference what the different dynamics of the song is. So it's a little quieter than the intro, obviously, but the hats are tight. The hi-hats are tight, and it's kind of driving. So it feels a little empty and feels kind of closed off because those hats are tight. Now the hats open up, right? The dynamic is changing. It's a crescendo. They're changing. Even though it's the chord progression is still going to be the same, and the vocal melody is still going to be the same. It's not repetitive once throughout that little 4-bar section of verse, because they're changing the mood and changing the dynamic, and the average person who listens doesn't catch that. But they, overall, they're along for the ride, and they like it because it's constantly dragging them along, because it's constantly fresh. But at the same time, if you want to sit down and analyze it and put it on paper, it's smart. I mean, it seems simple, but so far this is very smart. Verse B, right? We have verse A, which is the tight hats, vocals, drums, bass. Verse B, now it's open. The hi-hats are open. We have a full drum beat, and we have guitars that are kind of playing something. It's not even important. It's just that the guitars are there. So even though now we're into the second part of the verse, it's still the same thing as the first verse, but it feels different. They're recycling their parts properly because they've essentially gone through verse A, and now they're on to verse B, and it feels completely different. What's cool is that this verse is still the same chord progression as the intro. It just doesn't feel like it because they've masked it very well. Pre-chorus. Do we know what he says there? You think? Yeah, no one knows. Not even the internet. You could Google it. They don't even know. So now we're into a new dynamic. And additionally it's a new chord progression. So palm muted, all real tight palm muted guitars. Drums just kick and snare room, and then kind of this big vocal production where there's some backup vocals and some lyrics that we can't discern. But it's a new dynamic, and it's a genuinely new part. Muted transition, right? So what's going on here? Anybody? It is the chorus. It's the hook, right? But at the same time, the intro. So by the time they get to this part of the song, we've already heard it, but now it feels different because our ear is listening to that vocal melody. I like that the only lyrics I know, I've heard this song about 1 billion times because, like I said, I've gone through this process. The only lyrics that I can truly latch onto with any sort of confidence, I know he says, "Sugar, we're going down swinging," which again, that makes it even more impressive because this was like a huge, huge hit. So now they've recycled that part. They introduced the concept of the chorus before we knew it was the chorus. So that way, by the time we're hearing it now, all we're doing is listening to that vocal melody. It's a completely comfortable listen. It's very smart because we don't even realize that we've already heard the rest of it because we're just listening to the chorus. You know, subconsciously, we know we've already heard the background. So we're grabbing that vocal hook. I want to know who wrote it. I want to know, or whose idea that was. Was that does Pete Wentz and Fall Out Boy go through all of his favorite bands' records and write it down so that way he can think like, oh, this is a really smart idea? Or does their producer just say, hey, just do this? And they do that and then they write a hit song. I'm going to find out. I think I'm going to try and ask them. We'll see. So, let's get through this chorus. Chorus 1, vocal hook over the music of the intro. Okay, here it comes. That to me is a device, and we'll talk about devices in the future. But right there, it's a halftime change. You know, it's a dynamic change. So that way, they're still delivering the same part. It's the same chord progression they've been playing this whole time. Now it's the same vocal melody. But what they haven't done yet in this song is done anything repetitive. So where most local bands would probably just recycle that chorus again, or they played their 4 bars, they're going to play it again. Here they introduced a dynamic device where they dropped it to halftime, so it feels different. It's the same, but it feels different. I love a good halftime, good head nodder. So what is that? What would you guys call that? Well, definitely palm muting. You could call it a bridge. I call it a post-chorus. That's usually what I would call something like this, because it's just latched right onto the end of that chorus. And it's going to go through, and it's going to lead us right to the next verse, so that way the parts just aren't right up against each other. Right? There's nothing particularly smart about having a post-chorus. Like I said, it's just the onion on the sandwich. But what they did was smart. That's the pre-chorus again. It's the same chord progression as the pre-chorus, but it doesn't feel like it remotely because they do a triplet chug one time, right? It's still like the same. It's the same chord progression. They're just kind of walking up the fretboard. But earlier is and they're just kind of doing 16th note down pick palm mutes. But now and it's kind of followed by the toms. So maybe it's not a huge deal, but I think it's incredibly smart because it's just one of a lot of bullet points in this song that I feel like they got right. And they're giving you the same chord progression. When you hear that, it feels familiar and it feels comfortable. And they're not confusing the average 12-year-old girl by introducing another part, right? Because that was the target demographic when this song came out, is 12-year-old girls. Patrick. Sorry, Pat. But it's really smart, in my opinion. They're recycling a part they already gave you. One, it doesn't feel repetitive because they changed the dynamic by making it more of a tom beat, and they added that triplet chug, but it's the same chord progression. And additionally, they allowed it to kind of, be the missing Lego piece to connect that chorus to the verse. Very smart. Verse. Same verse melody as in the intro. Same verse bass line in terms of the chord progression. Except we had verse A and verse B before. I'd call this verse C because it's not the bass and drums of verse A, and it's not the same guitar melody that they used in verse B. So this is verse C. Palm muting open hi-hats, piano. So they're giving us the same thing they've already given us, but in a completely rebranded package. So it's still fresh. It's familiar because we've heard the basic progression and we've heard the basic vocal melody, but it's completely redone in a new package. So then this would be verse D. Still the same chord progression, still the same vocal melody, new guitar riff, and new overall drum feel. So they have 2 verses in the song, but the song itself, in my opinion, has what I would call 4 verses. Verse A, B, C, and D. So they've recycled the same progression and melody properly, and they've never once made it feel repetitive. I feel like when I'm here at the Oasis and I'm watching a band play, verse 1 is just 8 bars of the same thing, and then when it comes back around to verse 2, it's 8 bars of what verse 1 was. They leave nothing to the imagination, and it gets too repetitive. And that's one of the primary concepts that I feel like most local musicians are missing out on when they're writing songs, is they just keep it too simple, to the point where the songs aren't challenging for the listener. It becomes too familiar and too repetitive. And like I said, I feel like the producer or Fall Out Boy themselves, they get that concept, and when they're writing their songs and recording them, a lot of thought goes into this. So, verse D, here comes pre-chorus, same thing. Now to make sure that they haven't overused that muted transition, this time they're going to do a tom transition. Easy enough. Here's the chorus. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. This is the classic line. This song is moving right along. 2 minutes in, we're already at the second repeat of the chorus. And like I said, most songs will keep the first couple of choruses identical. They're trying to drive home that hook. They want it to get stuck in your head. When you're leaving here, I want you guys whistling, whistling Fall Out Boy. But like I said, the last choruses they're gonna change it a little bit. Halftime. Okay, so now we're in something new. This, I feel like a lot of times someone might call a part that glues 2 parts together a bridge. To me, just from jamming around with a bunch of musicians, pretty much my entire life, I've always kind of just called a bridge the part that really isn't the verse and isn't the chorus. A bridge can have multiple sections to it, but it's usually like the big third part of the song. You could almost call it that. So this to me is what I define as a bridge. So, that guitar's ringing out, but realistically, this is another device. And like I said, we'll talk about devices another time. But this to me is a drop, when all the instruments kind of drop out and you primarily focus on one thing. And in this case, it's vocals. I'll be your number one with the bullet. I already got your blacks, cock it and pull it. We're going down. So, backup vocals. They've added backup vocals, so that way, again, we had the transition, the solo vocals, and now backup vocals. And they're playing by the rules. They're not delivering the same part the same way twice, which is fine. But what I really like here is that we've already heard those backup vocals. Am I more than you? It's that guitar melody. They just rebranded it. So here's the guitar melody. But now it's vocals. they've rebranded the same melody. So not only have they avoided that part being overly repetitive, because they are, they're basically just playing the same thing over and over again. What they've done is they've added that vocal melody in there, and we've already heard that vocal melody, so it's familiar. It's not foreign to us. Smart. It's really smart. And it has like this counterpoint rhythm thing, which is kind of cool. There's another drop to get, to me that's the vocal hook, so it's like a vocal hook drop. Bridge 2, total throwaway part. They just needed a way to transition from one part to another, but it's still the same chord progression that the rest of the song has been. Chorus, or the last chorus, the big final chorus, you can already feel it. It's double time. It's faster than all the other choruses. They're turning this one up to 11. It has to be somehow bigger and cooler than the previous ones. So not only is it double time, that vocal melody is back. The intro guitar melody. They're turning this, that one. Yeah, maybe goes up past 11. They're pulling out all the stops to make sure that final chorus has all the support possible to make it sound cool. So, to get out of the song, we have another vocal drop, and it's the same vocal drop that they used to get out of the bridge. It's just delivering that hook over and over and over again so it gets stuck in your head. So now we have an outro. So that outro riff. Let's see. That was a lucky guess. But it's the same riff that they used to get into the bridge, and that's how they're getting essentially they're getting into the outro. Vocal drop. That melody is back, but this time it's guitar again. So it started as guitar on the intro, on the bridge, and last chorus they switched it to vocals, and now it's back on guitar. There's only a handful of parts to that song, but they completely rebrand and recycle. They change the textures, they change the instruments. It's very, very smart songwriting, because it's, like I said, you could break that down to be just like any other local band's music, but instead of just having the same verse and the same chorus, in the standard pop structure, they're very smart about how they utilize all their parts, and they make sure that from front to back, it never once feels repetitive. It never feels repetitive, even though it's a super repetitive song. They're constantly, like I said, recycling and rebranding their parts, so that way it makes it to be a pretty cool arrangement, and that's usually what you would refer to it as, the arrangement, in terms of what instruments come in where, or production. Because some of that stuff isn't necessarily going to be performable, but that didn't stop them from writing their songs. And that's usually kind of a crossroads that most musicians have to come to. Do you want to write songs because you hear a song in your head and you want it to sound a certain way, or when you write music, do you want to just be like the songs that you write, you have to perform them that way? And there's no right or wrong answer. No one's going to tell AC/DC like, you guys should have done more. You ever consider a string section or things like that? And the same thing with Deer Hunter, or a band like that, or Muse, where you're like, oh, you have 11 pianos going, cool. Like, I don't know how you're going to play that live, but it sounds awesome. Thanks for writing it. So there's no right or wrong answer for that stuff. You just kind of have to go with what you're aiming for. So we'll do one more Fall Out Boy song, and then I will never make you listen to Fall Out Boy again. Dance, Dance. The other hit song, I think Sugar was the first. You guys would probably know better than I would. Sugar was the first single, and then Dance was the second one. And they're not particularly related, but usually when a band has a successful single, the next single will have a lot of similar traits to the first one, just so that way they can kind of ride the wave. So, drum hook, right off the bat, same thing. This is another drum beat. I could kind of, You know, if I was trying to explain this song to someone, like, I swear to God, you've heard it. It's like, like I could sing that drum beat, which is cool because, like I said, most songs don't have drum beats that are, to me, are a definable hook. Okay, there's our 4 bars. There's our bass line. Tambourine. See what they're doing here? They could have started all 3 at the same time, but they're introducing one at a time, so it doesn't feel repetitive. They're keeping it staggered, so that way it's constantly fresh. It's constantly drawing your ear to a new place. Verse.
She says she's no good with words, but I'm worse. But they started out a joke of a romantic stuck to my tongue. Way down with.
Okay, now the guitars kick in. Again, the guitars could have come in at the beginning, but each time they're trying to introduce something new, so that way it's never once repetitive, even though it's been the same thing the whole time. And I guess your definition of repetitive, could vary. But in my opinion, despite the fact that it's been the same chord progression and same really everything, the fact that they've staggered the introduction of each part and when they come in makes it feel far less repetitive than it really is. And for the average listener who's not listening that deep, they're like, oh, it's constantly fresh, it's constantly changing. They're trying to keep up, which is cool. In the background here, there's a second guitar with a feedback crescendo. So, pre-chorus. It has this up-tempo, upbeat. It's a device, like I said. They've changed the feel of it, so the dynamic is different. That's how we're going to differentiate between the parts. Additionally, and it's not particularly important, but the vocals follow the guitar riff. It's just like a scale, like a beat. So there's our transition. That's their sliced tomato to get from the pre-chorus to the chorus. And right there, that to me is a drop. That's again where one instrument is kind of taking over for just that little part. And it's a cool way to transition. It's a cool device. And here, they're bringing back that verse guitar part. And maybe you realize that, maybe you don't. But again, that's creative recycling. They could have put any guitar riff there in the world, and instead they brought back one to make it, familiar without ever feeling repetitive. So chorus. Recognize that drum beat from the intro? Nothing particularly special. It is a pop chorus. There's nothing really there for me to latch onto. That's just the next part of the song. So now we have a post-chorus. And this is super smart in my opinion, and it's different than the previous post-chorus.
You always fold just
back to the verse. You can kind of feel his vocal energy ramping up there. It's a bit of a vocal crescendo in my opinion. But the one thing that you'll notice this verse is like 11 seconds long. It's probably the shortest verse in pop music history. And that is because, in my opinion, that whole post-chorus that we sat through is the verse. It's just instrumental. They've changed the dynamic and they've changed what we're listening to. Verse 1. So when we get into this part, initially it comes across, and it took me a couple times to fully grasp how to define it. But initially it feels like a post-chorus, and then it just gets right into the chorus. But like I said, it gets in right into the verse. But the verse that it gets into is like a quarter length of the previous verse, which I couldn't figure out why they would do that. And then I realized this whole verse is instrumental. They've added extra percussion. There's extra toms, and if you listen carefully in the mix, and this PA system might not be the best way to critically get into the delicate layers of the mix, but there's a lot of external percussion like hand claps and other crap going on. But everything there, that is the verse. That is the verse.
You always fold just.
A nice little transition. Again, it's another drop, and they use these a ton. And I think you probably might not be obvious, but a lot of artists use the drop a ton because it's an easy way to establish a part. And I feel like the drop can be awesome. The only time that I don't like a drop is when a band can't figure out how to transition from one part to another. So they're like, "Oh, everyone just stop playing," and then we'll all come back in. That's when that to me is usually identifying a couple things. One, those parts probably shouldn't go together, or two, you should write something creative to transition the parts. But when everyone just stops and it's like, oh, okay, now we'll just all start in on something new, that's usually a sign that those Legos or puzzle pieces don't necessarily go together. But this is
You always
fine
fold
because they're
just.
identifying the vocals and come back.
Drink up its last
Here's that crescendo right back into the pre-chorus. Same pre-chorus.
These words are all I have, so write them. Sing me them just to get by. Won't you show me little bit of spot?
I remember the first time I heard this song, I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, it totally doesn't fit with the rest of the song. The mood is different. Like, the rest of the song kind of has this B minor-y feel, and without getting into too much music theory nerdery, B minor and D major are the same thing. They're made up of the same notes. They just have a different tonality. So when I heard this, it's like, it's kind of like he's singing on the major notes of the key, and it just feels so weird. It has this disco beat, and drum sound is like primarily room instead of like the huge drum sound that the rest of the song is mixed with. I couldn't figure out what its purpose is. And most parts of your song should have a purpose, and if it doesn't have a purpose, it probably shouldn't be in your song. So, like I said, it's major, disco beat, more room sound, more muted transitions. Chorus 2, the same. There's some extra vocal layers. A little bit. Let's keep it fresh. Okay, bridge. Kind of a dynamic change there, where it's just a little adjusted, and then you have that like octave scale climb guitar. Now it's kind of ominous and angry because you have the primarily minor guitar scale, and that vocal melody sounds cool. It's the same part of this. It's, whether or not you guys realized it before you heard the song. But based on the way Zach's dancing over there, I'm guessing he's realized this. So, but since all the music in the background has changed, you don't necessarily recognize that it's a part that you've already heard. To me, that's unbelievably smart, because now when this part hits, it feels big and it feels different. But there's a certain level of familiarity to it because we've already heard it. We heard that vocal melody and we heard those lyrics before. And like, I still don't know what he says. I've heard the song a billion times. I don't know what he's saying on those lyrics, but that's not taking away of the value of the part. So now the value of that third pre-chorus, that really weird part, is that it's introducing the bridge before we've gotten to the bridge. So that way when the bridge hits, it feels new and it feels fresh, but it's not going to scare people off because we've already heard it. There's a level of familiarity, but it's repackaged and branded so differently that you don't necessarily pick up on the fact that it is the same part. I think it's really smart. Really smart. Nothing particularly special about those chords. They're just trying to, dig their way out of this bridge. I have a feeling that they probably wrote the bridge first, really enjoyed it, couldn't figure out how to make it work with the rest of the song, added in that pre-chorus, or the third pre-chorus, if you will, and then here they've got to, like I said, play themselves out of it. Back to the muted transitions. So, last chorus, they have to turn it up. They gotta make it bigger and cooler. Here it comes. There it is. Layers of backup vocals. Not even particularly important, like what those backup vocals are, but it's just making it feel bigger and cooler and more dynamic than the previous choruses. So that way, when you, like, the first time that Fall Out Boy fan would hear this song, when those backup vocals kick in, the hairs on the back of their neck stand up, because it just feels like, it's like, oh man, how could this song get any better? Backup vocals, awesome! And it just keeps climbing and going bigger and bigger and better. Okay, we have an outro now. We're transitioning, and to my ear, it just sounds like they're hitting the guitar strings open and letting that intro drum hook reestablish itself. So now it's just the intro. Intro for the outro. Breakfast for dinner. So now they've basically brought in all the parts that they could have started at the same time on the intro. The guitar, the tambourine, all hits. So it all feels familiar, but it's being textured and like I said, repackaged in a different structure in terms of how how it comes at us. So now it feels doesn't necessarily feel like a completely new and different part, but it also doesn't feel like the same as when we heard it the first time. And then over the top of that vocal hook, just to leave you with that little bit, in case you didn't get enough of the vocals when you heard it the first time. And scene. So I think it's both of those songs, like I said, are not songs that, like, the content of the music doesn't really do anything for me. But when I break it down and I look at it on paper, it's unbelievably well done and unbelievably well written. And I feel like you can do this with a lot of pop music. And this is what I would do when I wanted to improve my songwriting. Is I would, like I said, it's universal. Whatever band that you've been listening to, you could do this with their record and start trying to understand what they're doing and how their music is different than yours. And like I said, I start with pop music, and that's what I'd recommend doing with for all of you. Go get a notebook on the way home, and whatever one of your favorite poppier records is that's been made in the last 15 years, kind of start diving into it. Like, to me, Kill Switch Engage, The End of Heartache, that to me is pop metal. Like, it's metal by definition due to the amount of gain and double kick and screams, but at the same time, it's also pretty much pop music, like in terms of how they approach their structuring and their chord progressions and things like that. And they're playing by the same rules, and they do the same exact stuff. Because what's his name? Adam D. He's a smart producer, and he gets that stuff. And sadly, I think that coming from the metal standpoint, he created the whole metalcore genre, whether it was intentional or not, in like the 2002, 2003 time frame, because he started just recording and producing all of these bands, and they would all bring him their songs, and he'd be like, oh, these songs are cool, but what would make them cooler is if we took this part and moved it here, and this is just getting cut because it's terrible, and this part goes here. And next thing you know, all of these bands from that area, you could look it up online, there's a billion of them, but all those, like, East Coast, Boston, metalcore bands, they were all unbelievably smartly written pop metal. And I use the term loosely, but they're all coming from one guy's brain, You know, so whether you're listening to All That Remains or what are some other bands that are out there, Unearth, all that stuff, they're Adam D, you know, for like the you know, over the course of like 2002 to maybe 2005, he produced a ton of records out of his studio, and they all kind of had like the same feel. So like all of those, they're metal, but in my opinion, they structure out the same way a Fall Out Boy song would, because he takes the time to kind of go through and make sure that, oh, okay, your verse here is the same as this verse, so let's change it up. Let's, you know, add a guitar harmony, something, some sort of layer that makes each part feel different. And to me, going through and doing this with whatever the bands are that you enjoy, you're probably going to learn way more than you would have just by attending here and having me yell at you about Fall Out Boy songs. You know, it's important. But like I said, I like to use Fall Out Boy as an example because they're unbelievably successful. The songs are essentially simple because they're, you know, 2 or 3 parts, but they never feel like it. And it's really creative songwriting. And if you can apply this stuff to your songs, your music will be smarter for it. And that's basically how I go through when I used to do this a lot more frequently. You know, that's what I would do. I'd grab a notebook and I'd sit down with a record and I would just start writing out the structures and what each part is, exactly how I put it in here. So consider doing that. It'll make you a smarter songwriter. That's all I have. So if you have any questions, lay it on me. If not, you guys can tackle more pizza if there's any left. Any questions? Okay. Well, if you guys don't know each other, go meet each other. Shake someone's hand if you don't know them. Cool. Thanks, guys.